am in my home office, which is in Belmont, Massachusetts.
Where you're sitting now, is that where you write?
Yeah, this is my working room. It's a small room. It's up on the third floor, so a little bit away from the activity of the house. And I trudge up here first thing in the morning and stay up for as long as I can.
Is it strange for you in a way to be talking with me, to be on Facebook, to be interacting with the outside world using the same screen when you're writing and you're just by yourself doing that?
Um, well, I'll tell you, the screen is already both a tool for me and a constant temptation. I can't tell you how many times I'll check my email, check my Facebook, check my website in the course of a day. It's become this almost like a tick. Like if I'm stymied, if I can't find a word. In the past, I might have looked out the window. I might have gotten another cup of coffee. Who knows what I did to kill that time? But now it's almost a tick to check the email. And I know there are writers who are, disabling their connections and trying to seal themselves off. I do get a little annoyed by the fact that this screen is always a kind of portal into the wider world, and this room is a little bit less sealed off than it used to be. But it's nice to talk to you.
Thanks. I know that New Jersey's been a part of some of your writing. Just talk to me about how New Jersey contributed to your development as a writer.
Well, people ask that question a lot, and it's hard to say. I think it just happens to be where I'm from, and it's a very distinctive place. So I grew up in a kind of working class New Jersey that, in that form doesn't really exist anymore. Like a lot of northeastern working class neighborhoods, sort of the factories left, and the town I grew up in called Garwood is a little bit fancier now than it was then. It was a little harder edged. But we grew up in the shadow of New York in the 70s, and that created a funny kind of dual identity. It's like we were connected to the big city, but we were kind of opposed to it in a way. We were drawn to it, but threatened by it. The 70s were a kind of an interesting time in the city, and like my father hated it, and would always be kind of amazed that we wanted to go there and spend time in it. And like you see in a novel like The Wishbones, the way that New York looms in Dave's life. It's a kind of a promised land, but it's a threatening one where he feels a little bit out of place. It makes him feel, a little bit small, a little bit inadequate, but it's also exciting. So I would always say that my New Jersey, it was like a kind of a working class middle American place, but it was so close to New York City that it was different, I think, from small towns elsewhere.
Do you feel that the New Jersey that you knew is reflected in your work? I mean, are we talking autobiographical here, or is in terms of your writing, quote unquote, what you know, or are you really trying to invent new places, even if they're familiar suburban kind of settings that a lot of us are familiar with?
Well, I make a real distinction in my work between my first three books, Bad Haircut, The Wishbones, and Joe College, are very specifically set in working class New Jersey, and I drew, I think, quite freely on my memories of that place. And I didn't try to reinvent it. I really tried, and to the best of my ability, to kind of evoke it and think hard about what it meant to be from that place and to set characters in that place. That was my original ambition as a writer, which was to sort of, I felt like there was this world and nobody else was writing about it. Of course, even as I had that thought, Bruce Springsteen started to write about it in a way that became mythic. But I did see that work as being in a kind of a small town American tradition, and I did see it as being a kind of an investigation of social class and class mobility. A book like Joe College, very specifically about class mobility. So those are our autobiographical books about the world that I grew up in. Now, Little Children, The Abstinence Teacher, Election, I set more in a kind of generic suburban American place. And I think of them as public novels and political novels, and they're more, I think, investigating some idea of America as a whole, or at least suburban America, in a kind of less specific way, more like the way that the Simpsons might use Springfield or South Park, these places that are more like a metaphor for a sort of middle American ideal.
We're talking face to face here via Skype, which is something you couldn't do 10 years ago. With the creation of YouTube, everyone can be a star now. Everyone is accessible to everyone else. And I'm just curious if that accessibility for the public and that lost kind of privacy, or putting yourself out there more, has that impacted, the way that you look at the stories that you want to write? Does that
Yeah,
make
well,
sense?
that makes a lot of sense, and it's very interesting for fiction writers to think about this. As I say, one of the things that I felt when I was starting out was I was writing about a part of the world that was known like only to itself. And now, it's both a resource and a kind of question for me. The town that I grew up in now has its own Facebook site, and a lot of people that I grew up with are on it, and they often have like long chains of sort of remembering details from that time. And it's really kind of exhilarating for me to see it and to remember what they remember, but it also, makes me wonder if I were writing Bad Haircut now, for example, you know, it would be harder for me, like, not to go there, not to borrow other people's memories, not to have them maybe correct my memories. It does kind of create this almost like public narrative that I don't know if it supplants a writer's vision, but it sits there beside it, and I think there's less of that sense that writers might have that there's this whole unexplored world out there because basically everybody's out there telling their stories, showing their pictures, telling you what they're eating, what they're watching, what they're doing, what they're thinking. It's a real challenge, I think, to fiction, and I think it will change fiction in all kinds of ways. I mean, I know that I have a lot of Facebook friends. I didn't do a fan page because I didn't really understand how it worked at the beginning. For a lot of friends who I think I don't actually know personally, and they post their statuses, and they become kind of fictional characters to me. And because I don't know them, I just get little fragments of them, and I have to create an identity for them. And so it's kind of a fascinating thing for me. I've started to use Facebook a little bit in my new novel. There's some Facebook stuff. In Little Children, when high-speed internet was more just becoming a kind of common household thing. I had this whole story about a guy who becomes obsessed with internet porn. I've been trying to kind of, in my own way at least, kind of filter these technological changes into the fiction.
Election and Little Children both were adapted into movies, and Little Children, you helped write the screenplay for that. Versus Election, did you have any hand in writing the screenplay for that?
I didn't, no. I didn't know that I would have wanted to back then. I think what happened was after Election got made, and it was made into such a wonderful movie that became kind of an instant classic, and people, for whatever reason, people got in touch with me, and I was offered a deal to write a couple TV pilots for the WB network, and they paid me a lot more than I was getting paid to teach part-time composition in college. And so I thought would take it just as a kind of an experiment, and started this side job as a screenwriter, which finally culminated in Little Children, which that was the first thing I got produced. And I've come to really like it, and really respect the craft of it, and feel like I'm qualified to do it. I think that was my main feeling at the beginning was, why would I do this? I don't know how to do it. Why not someone who's trained to do it? On the other hand, it's a kind of a narrative form. It's not all that different from fiction if you can start to think in a slightly different way, and will yourself to, kind of detach from the choices you've made and see it in a kind of new form. And that took me a long time, I think, to learn how to do that. But I really do enjoy it now.
You had alluded to the book that you're working on now. You had mentioned that Facebook is a part of it. Are you at liberty to talk to me any more about it and give me some more details?
It's called The Leftovers, and it all I'll say about it is that it has a kind of futuristic or sci-fi premise.
I'm just going to go back to the basics. Why are you a writer?
I have always loved stories. I've always got even when I was a little kid, I just loved sort of being at the table and listening to my uncles or my cousins tell stories, listening to friends at school tell stories. And I think as I started to read really good fiction, I started to think about storytelling as an art form as well. It was just a kind of basic human activity. And, um, it's been just a kind of constant in my life, and I've never really felt let down by it. I mean, I think I just live for stories, whether they're my stories or someone else's. It almost, I mean, it's kind of a weird loop, but I do feel like we live for our stories.
In terms of your short stories, The Smile on Happy Chang's Face, selected for inclusion in Best American Short Stories. What did that mean to you?
Well, that was really great because that story, really loved that story, and I was really proud of it. And then again, like some other work of mine, I had a hard time finding a home for it, and so it was really kind of one of those retroactive feelings of satisfaction that story started to get recognized and people really seemed to care for it. Because sometimes you can lose faith in your own work if other people don't respond to it at the beginning the way that you might want them to.
And how do you know when a book is right, when you've created a place that is real and that will be real to other people?
Boy, that's a very interesting question, because there's some element of it that's just faith that you have, that there's something here, and for some long period of time, I think you're working on faith, and then at some mysterious point, there's some kind of critical mass that you achieve, and suddenly uh, there's something real there, and you're inside of it, and it'd be so it's not a thing. It's not a question of beforehand, and it's not a question of when you print it out and say I have a book here, that at some point in the course of it, where something happens, and I think the hard part for writers is just being able to rely on that faith, that sense that there's something here, I'm going to find it. Because sometimes you have to work for a year before you're sure that you've actually found it, or that it's coming to life. Sometimes you have to go all the way through. Sometimes you don't know till somebody else reads it and says that they liked it, or they saw it, or they felt this way about it. So it's an interesting. I didn't think it goes from book to book. Sometimes there's a challenging scene that you're going to have to get to, and you sort of feel like uh, a lot of the work is just preparation for this one thing that you think of as central to the book. And what's interesting is sometimes by the time you get there, you realize that it wasn't as central as you thought, and that the other stuff wasn't the preparation, that it was the real thing. And that part remains very, very mysterious to me, and is sort of the most interesting psychological challenge of being a novelist, which is just having the patience to let the thing become real.
Tom, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Max. I enjoyed it.